Are you worried that you live in an area that has high radon levels and you want to know how to measure it and what the potential risks are to you and your family's health? Well, this is the podcast episode for you. Welcome to Heal Your Home. Coming up in this episode of Heal Your Home from the Home Health Expert is radon as serious as people might think? And if so, how do we measure it and what do we do about it? Also, I have the great privilege of speaking to Aaron from Land Fitness in regards to physical well-being within your home. I'll also, of course, have a listener question in regards to a 1905 property and the risks of radon, and again, what to do about it within specific environments and bespoke homes, as well as a tenant top tip in regards to tenants' rights to request a radon test from their landlord. But first, let's talk radon.
Heal Your Home with Jason Ratcliffe, the home health expert.
So let's talk radon and how harmful it can be to you and your family's health. Now, this is no way scare tactics. However, it is serious to understand how serious it is. So radon does increase the risk of lung cancer if in high exposure levels. And also, the longer the exposure, the greater the risk. And radon can cause 1 in 100 deaths in regards to lung cancer every year in the UK, based on UK radon search and general research that's been undertaken. Now, this is something that should be taken seriously, but is it worrying? Because places like Cornwall, you go on to radon search and it will always tell you there's a high level of radon throughout. So, well, yes, it is. And it is something that does need to be addressed. It does need to be measured because of the serious nature of this and also the potential health issues and implications that it can have. Now, what is radon? Well, radon breaks down and creates a radioactive dust in the air, which we breathe in. Now, the dust then gets trapped in our airways and emits radiation that can damage the inside of our lungs. This damage can be caused by smoking, but it also increases the risk of lung cancer. Now, this, when you think about it, is potentially the same kind of damage as smoking can have in your lungs, is a serious issue, especially as it's something you do not necessarily know is there. So the big issue with radon really is knowing that or measuring and knowing how affected you are and what the risk is. So let's talk about that next. So there are multiple different sites which you can get radon measurements or measuring equipment from. These are not a instant measuring and here's your answer type deal. In actual fact, they can take over 3 months to actually detect the radon levels, which then go back to the manufacturer or the supplier, and then they would then interpret the data and get back to you after that. So it is not something that can be done overnight. So it is something that if you do worry or you feel like your property may suffer from high radon levels, to make sure that if possible, you're out of that property while the tests are being undertaken. Now, obviously, it is not always possible to relocate for such a long period of time, but then it's always worth obtaining advice from UK radon specialists, typically well ventilated areas, or going and making sure that you're outside of the property as long as possible is a ways to mitigate your risk. So what type of property is more susceptible to radon? Typically, 1945 is when building regulations started to come in the UK. Now, this is an area that some degree of barriers were put in place. These were damp-proof courses and damp-proof membranes. Now, they weren't that great, and by now they've probably broken down or they've been damaged from renovation works or just age-related defects and deterioration. So the older the property, typically, the higher the risk of higher build-ups of radon. Now, this is because your property will have less barriers, less ways of keeping that radon out. As previously mentioned, it comes up from the ground. Now, if you think new build properties, you really don't have a lot as long as they meet building regulations and they have adequate damp proof in place, and they tend to double up with radon barriers in areas that have high radon levels. You probably will be okay. So if you're going into a modern build, as long as they put those barriers in place, which they should do to pass off any kind of warranty and building regulations, then you should be absolutely fine. But in older properties, this is where the troubles can lie, and this is where you would want to get further checks taken. Now, ventilating your home is a great way to keep those levels down and managed, even in areas that may have higher risks of radon. Why? Because these particles, or this radioactive dust that comes up, or a gas as it were, then ends up accumulating within your property. Now, if you then have mechanical ventilation or open your windows and doors thoroughly and have good natural air circulation, it will really help keep those levels down. But also, please bear in mind, it is always worth having a radon test done in your home, just so you are aware of what you're dealing with. But how to reduce those levels? Well, first off, ventilation is a huge benefit, whether that's mechanical or whether that is natural. Now, typically they both go hand in hand, so actually it is worth having the two undertaken. Now, depending on where you're looking, obviously radon barriers is a fantastic way of doing it, and depending on the level of radon within a home, then depends on the severity or the significance of radon barriers and protection. So radon sumps is a great way because it allows any build-up of radiation then to exit safely from any subfloor void area. Positive ventilation, natural underfloor ventilation such as subfloor voids. So typically in an older building, if you've got timber framed or timber suspended floors, make sure you have adequate subfloor vents, which are the little vents normally in the footings of your property. Make sure you have one on the front, one on the back, or multiple on the front, multiple on the back, to make sure you have a good air circulation pushing through underneath the home. That will obviously help more than just radon. It will help keep the absolute humidity down, keep condensation levels down, which can then prevent timber decay occurring, such as wet rot, dry rot, wood borer, insect infestation. So there's more benefits to your home than just radon, but for this instance, we're just talking radon. So it is really important to keep that ventilated. Do not block these up because heat escape may be going through the floor. You may then want to look at other things such as adequate insulation for your floors. So very important, do not block any of the subfloor vents within your home. But also, if there are extensions, commonly these tend to have massive oversight in the sense that they block subfloor vents. If this is the case, make sure you find other ways of improving and maintaining that natural airflow through the subfloor area. This is really important, and especially when you've got cellars or basements where you can have big accumulation of radon just underneath the home. And if you're going into that atmosphere, it's really not a great environment to place yourself or any people that you live with. So again, having that positive mechanical ventilation, natural airflow, and having the air source, having radon sumps in place are extremely good ways of being able to manage such issues. But how much is this going to cost? Obviously, any kind of improvements in a home will cost something, but depending on the severity or the intensity of the radon levels within your home will then affect what you're going to do about it. Now, typically, when you have things like mechanical ventilation systems, active sumps, etc., these can range anywhere between £500 up to a few £1,000, depending on whether you're doing it yourself or whether you have a contractor in. Now, again, if you have underfloor ventilation, you can then get somebody to potentially do that for almost cost in the sense of labor. You don't necessarily need a lot of materials to create a subfloor void and allow that to ventilate if you've already got some form of void under your home. Where the issues lie is if you have a solid concrete base and no damp-proof course and no vapor barriers, and it would therefore be advised to potentially look at alternative options such as additional radon barriers that may go under your floor coverings. But this is something that a specialist within or radon specialist would then be able to point you in the right direction, depending on your home, because older properties obviously still require breathability. Radon barriers can also double up as potential damp-proof courses, which can then work very nicely in a home. So a lot of improvements to a property are not just a one-size-fits-all. If you go and put a radon barrier in, that can end up being a damp-proof course, for example. So it's not just a cost to do one simple thing. It actually may benefit your home in more ways than one. So it's always worth being smart with the way that you do renovations within your home.
Heal Your Home with Jason Ratcliffe, the home health expert.
Within this episode of Heal Your Home, I've had the great privilege of speaking to Aaron from Land Fitness, who is a personal trainer and a great experienced professional within general physical well-being and how we can reduce stress and anxiety and improve sleep cycles, etc. within our daily life. Here's what we talked about.
On the show, it's great to have you here, and it's awesome to have your perspective on obviously well-being from a personal training perspective, rather than the normal industry construction professionals that we normally have on. But for everyone who doesn't know, could you introduce yourself?
Firstly, this has been a long time coming. We've been trying to do this for a while, so it's a pleasure to be here. My name's Aaron, and I run the personal training business Land Fitness. I've been a personal trainer for 3.5 years now and absolutely love it. And there's many aspects to health, and I'm sure I can bring a lot of value to this podcast.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here. So I suppose in your own personal life, how is the knowledge you've built up, how has that kind of helped you personally in your general well-being journey? Because obviously you couldn't have always been, a personal trainer and know what you know.
No, I mean, as a teenager, like most people, alcohol, food, I got to a point where I was overweight, I was unhappy with how I looked and felt. And you often see images of stronger, more muscular guys, and you aspire to that. Yeah. Especially if growing up you were into superheroes and stuff like that. You see that and you're like, that's what I want to be. That's the pinnacle of masculinity. And I was unhappy where I was, so I wanted to change it, and I made a decision, cut off the past, go to the future, and actually started learning about nutrition, learning all the different aspects of it, the biochemistry, why we lose weight, how eating affects our health and well-being, and got myself into a gym and started learning the basics and made a few mistakes, as everyone does.
As everyone does, absolutely.
But always learning. I don't think you ever stop learning. So, and over the years and studying it, built up quite a repertoire of knowledge, and so I'd just like to share that as much as possible with as many people as possible.
Fantastic. And that's a great introduction actually into, so as part of Heal Your Home podcast and the Home Health Expert, we are actually having LAN or Land Fitness as part of our blog posts and supporting all of our listeners as well. So hopefully we can have a different take on the well-being for everybody listening and reading through our podcast or website. So it's great to have you on board.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So when you were saying about eat the frog thing, what? Because you said that before. It's really quite an interesting terminology.
I can't remember who said it. It might have been Ray Dalio or some influential figure like that. But he basically said, if you've got a big to-do list throughout the day and you leave the worst task till the end of the day, you're constantly thinking about it, you're constantly stressed about it. So you're getting all these small tasks done and you're working up towards it. And quite often, if it's something that you don't want to do and you leave it to the end of the day, you may procrastinate on it, you may not do it at all.
Yeah.
So get it done first thing in the morning if possible, and then the rest of your day will go easier and easier and easier, and it's not looming over you, not causing stress. And that's I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
If it's possible to do it early, get it done early.
Because I think as well, if it's something you have to think about and use kind of mental sort of focus, I think, it can be really challenging if you leave it too long, because obviously your natural energy cycle through the day, and you know, if you're eating away at what I would class as your pot of mental energy for that day, and by the end of the day, when it's probably something that you really should have done beforehand, you kind of then go, oh, I just don't have the energy or the inclination to do this.
Of course, throughout the day, I think like we've got like a certain amount of willpower, and it's not a finite resource. So the more things we do, the lower our willpower gets, and then at the end of the day, we're more likely to procrastinate on it, more likely to push it off to the next day. And think of it like carrying a backpack around with you all day. You've got this heavy load on you. You know you've got to do it.
Yeah.
And it's just weighing you down all day, draining you further. So those easier tasks probably deplete more willpower because you're carrying this backpack around with you, and that big task at the end of the day just drains you that little bit more. So get all the stuff that you don't want to do done in the morning, and then your day will go a little bit smoother. You'll have less mental load, and your stress will be a little bit lower, and time management will be a lot easier because obviously if you plan for it in the morning, the rest of the day will go smoothly, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I agree. I think, you know, you can, even if you know that, you can find yourself getting into an unnatural rhythm, I suppose, and bad habits. And you can, especially if you're tired. If I'm tired, I end up making poor decisions in time management, even if you know consciously, you know how you should do it. And then, you know, as soon as you're tired, you're like, oh, I'll put it off later. And then by the end of it, you go, oh, I wish I did that earlier. And then it then accrues, because then it gets on top of the next day's task list.
Yeah, of course, and it just snowballs and you get stressed, and then you get into that perpetual habit. If you push stuff off perpetually and consistently do it, you're building that neurological pathway of, oh, I can just push it off, and you get into that habit of doing that repetitively, and then your to-do list grows and you never get stuff done.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the more you decide on a behavior, the stronger it gets.
Yeah.
And that neurological pathway gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's how we develop habits.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because I suppose the term, obviously, discipline is it's discipline over motivation. I think that's something which I'm a believer of, because I think motivation can come and go, whereas discipline is very much that. It's a repetition of, you know, doing the same thing. And I suppose what you were saying then is reinforcing those, or strengthening those neurological pathways to then kind of go, cool, well, this is my pattern, this is what I'm used to. So doing, I suppose, let's talk about the bad habits then, because obviously we want to have good habits. We want to be able to say, yes, we're going to be building strong, you know, neurological pathways and habits that are going to progress our life and be beneficial, but it's not that easy all the time if you're not aware of it. So what would you say would be a most common bad habits that people may reinforce?
Bad habits, so if we're talking about habits, we need to talk about dopamine. And dopamine, a lot of people mistake dopamine for the pleasure hormone, but it's not. It's kind of like the motivation to get something. So as hunter-gatherers, we'd have dopamine, the hunger and stuff like that, to go and chase something, to go and kill that particular animal, to get food or to reproduce. So if we're building habits, that dopamine basically is going to build up and it's going to push us towards something. So if you're constantly going towards, whether it's takeaways or alcohol, drugs, pornography, all of that sort of stuff, that's going to deplete your dopamine. You're going to be reinforcing that neurological pathway, making it stronger and stronger and stronger, so that habit gets even more ingrained. So it's kind of a constant battle to evaluate what habits are good, what habits are bad. And the analogy I like to use is, imagine you're in a tall field and there's really tall grass. If you walk down one pathway all the time, all the grass gets trampled down. It's really easy to walk through that pathway.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got another pathway which you want to take, but you've always gone down the easy pathway, it's a lot more effort to actually walk through that pathway where it's overgrown. And so think of that like neurological pathways. So the more we walk down a path, the easier it is, the less resistance, and we're more likely going to go the easy way.
Yeah.
Whereas if you want to change your habits and walk through the long grass where it's overgrown, it takes effort.
Yeah.
But with habits, obviously, that dopamine we get from it depletes over time. So we need more and more of that particular thing.
Yeah.
And with takeaway alcohol, that's how it perpetually gets worse and worse and worse, because it doesn't give us that dopamine we desire.
Yeah. So then you're needing more of it. And
Yeah. It's like caffeine. So when you start drinking caffeine, the first coffee you ever had, I'm sure you were buzzing, running around. But as you ingest it more and more and more, you get a tolerance to it.
Yeah.
It's much like the stimulus that gives us dopamine, whether it's alcohol or whatever. We need more stimulus from that thing to get the same amount of dopamine.
Yeah.
So you really need to choose your habits wisely, because if you compound on a negative habit, it can really be a downward spiral.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, because obviously that is something that can be put in place for good and bad habits, and I suppose it's the same process. And like you were saying about kind of going through that field and the easiest path, now a lot of people may associate an easy path, or an easier path, with bad habits, but actually if you're focused on discipline, or doing the right choices, eventually going to the gym, or making a light work-life balance, or whatever it may be, will reinforce positive habits. And then it will be harder to make the wrong choices, because that isn't something you're used to.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So if you step away from your bad habits, and initially when you start going to the gym and you go at 6, 7 a.m. in the morning, you feel like death. You're just like, this is really difficult. I don't like what I'm doing. But over time, you develop that discipline, that routine, and that neurological pathway builds, and it becomes easier and easier and easier. And when you start seeing results, you get external validation as well. You're like, oh wow, this is actually working.
Yeah.
So not only do you get dopamine from building that habit of working out every day or every other day, in the morning you see benefits in your health, your cognition, you strengthen that neurological pathway for that habit, and you're desensitizing yourself from the bad habits as well.
Yeah.
Then you switch from the easy path, and then you're walking through that field, and then you're making a new path for yourself.
Yeah.
And eventually the old bad habit one will overgrow.
Yeah.
And it'll be harder to go down there. You won't like it as much. And then the easier path will become the good habits.
Yeah. Because I always tend to find with me, going off of topic a little bit, but bad food choices and the gym or fitness tend to go hand in hand, in the sense of you eat a takeaway, for example, that you shouldn't have, and then you go to the gym the next day, you feel worse for it, and then when you then sort of, your body says, I really want a takeaway again, it remembers more of the negative. Well, actually, if I do that, I'm going to feel really bad afterwards, or when I go to the gym. But if I don't go to the gym and I say, oh, I don't have time or whatever, then you don't have that repercussion or accountability. So there's almost less reason not to go down a bad path, even if you know it's the wrong path to go down.
Yeah, I think that's multifactorial though. When you start going to the gym, that's like a pillar habit. Yeah. So it props up everything else. Like anyone who's going to the gym, they're trying to make the right choice. They're trying to get healthier. They're trying to get stronger, fitter, whatever. And most people, when they've done the gym, they've done their session, they'll want to, quote unquote, not ruin it when they leave the gym. So they'll generally make better choices.
Yeah.
But if they do decide to have a takeaway, really bad food that makes them feel awful, depletes their energy, and just makes them feel gross, that's going to feel like they've wasted their time in the gym. And eventually they'll be like, okay, this food doesn't sit with my identity now.
Yeah.
Because as humans, we like to have an identity. We like to be able to say, right, I am this person.
Yeah.
And if something's not cohesive to that identity, then it kind of has like a cognitive dissonance where it doesn't fit in with who we are. So then we're more likely, if we maintain and be consistent with the gym, that we're going to make better food choices.
Yeah.
And then you've got the physiological effects of that food as well, where it depletes our energy, makes us feel awful, gives us brain fog. And then if you're trying to improve your life, feel better about yourself, have more energy, you'll quickly realize that eating the junk foods,
Yeah.
the processed, hyper palatable foods, aren't conducive to your ultimate goal.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and something you said there as well about how, you know, people's identity, and I think that it resonates with me in the sense of going back to your home environment. And you know, if you made your home something that wasn't recognizable for your own personal identity, it could, I'm assuming, it, you know, induce stress, anxiety, discomfort, and, you know, prevent you from fully re-energizing in your home. Is that something you would agree with?
Yeah, I think like we were saying, it needs to fit in with your identity. So taking the house, for example, if you like yoga, for example, but all your stuff's always in the cupboard, then it's out of the way. It's not easy. You need that space which you identify with, which complements your life. Like sort of like talking about the environment and stuff like that, if we're still on the fitness thing, having your shoes by the door and just making your environment fit your routine and your way of life, and make your daily habits like easier and smoother to run through, just makes it easier. So if you want to develop a good habit, don't have the thing that you need tucked away somewhere. You need to be able to get access to it really, really quickly. For like, if you want to become a runner, you put your running shoes by the front door. So then you don't have to think about it.
Exactly.
You're not walking through that field along grass because they're right there. You don't need to make that decision. It's just, so your environment plays a big role in how your life plays out. For example, like if you wanted to be an artist, you wouldn't have all your stuff packed away. You'd have a nice clean area which enables you to be who you are and fit your identity. So it's kind of like removing any areas of resistance in your life and making your environment fit your life.
Yeah. No, that's great. So, I mean, as well, I'm assuming it's almost personal accountability as well, because if you were going to try and run more, for example, and you've got your shoes or your running shoes at the front door, you're going to be seeing those. They're not out the way, so it's literally at the forefront of your mind. And if you have to actively walk past them and choose not to put them on to go for a run, so it's almost like, well, why are you not doing that?
Yeah, exactly. You need to trip over your good habits.
Absolutely.
All the time.
Yeah. Cool. And we often say about multi-use homes as well. So, you know, not everyone has a space for a gym, for example, or a studio or whatever your passion may be, and to fit your personal identity. And then it's that, well, obviously there's things in a home that you have to have, like a bedroom and bathrooms and kitchens. And then it's sort of saying, well, how can I use this space to then to almost multi-use to facilitate and optimize my personal, you know, label, what I'm labeling myself as. So, you know, how from your experience, I know you're not an interior designer or anything like that, but from just your experience, how would you deal with that in your own home?
I mean, a lounge is like a perfect example. Like usually, like you might have a coffee table in the middle of the room, so you like obviously you can have games night, meals in front of TV. But because that coffee table is movable, you've got quite a large space where you can incorporate fitness, or there's lots of ways you can use a space. You don't need a lot of space. It just needs to be adaptable. So yeah, in that regard, like, I think a multi-use area is fantastic, because if you've got loads of hobbies or restraints because of your family, it can be changed throughout the day or a weekly basis, or whenever you're using it in a particular way. So yeah, having a room which is multi-use, I think that's fantastic. Especially if you don't have access to a gym, using that, whether it's yoga or using kettlebell or stretching. Yeah.
So putting you straight on the spot with that, then, if you were looking at, say, if I, for example, here, we were in this room, you know, you could be relaxing, etc., but also there's not a huge amount of storage. So putting away, gym equipment or things like that are not appropriate, or you just can't do it.
Yeah.
What would you recommend to somebody in that situation?
Whether they had no equipment.
Well, if there were equipment available, but for example, fold away treadmills and
Yeah. Okay, so like if you've got like limited equipment, like you might have a few resistance bands, some kettlebells, dumbbells, just basic stuff. There's lots of things you can do. You can get a program, you can get just a bodyweight program. You don't need necessarily to have any kit. Obviously some kit is useful because it adds resistance to the movement. But yeah, if you've got a few resistance bands, dumbbells, kettlebells, they can easily be stored away in a small box under the stairs or wherever.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of things you can do. You don't necessarily need heavy weight to actually gain mobility, strength, or power or anything like that, or fitness. There's lots of techniques you can use to increase its efficacy. For example, like you could control the tempo. You could do X amount of reps. So like for hypertrophy, for example, if you're trying to gain some muscle, rep ranges between 8 and 30. If you get close to failure, you're going to get that hypertrophic stimulus and that muscle growth. So if you've got a resistance band and you're pulling it up and lowering it down, bicep curl, for example, and you're getting to failure, say like 26 reps in, that might seem excessive, but if you get to failure and you're controlling the tempo, then you're going to get the same benefits, whereas if you had a much heavier dumbbell and you could only do 8.
Yeah.
So there's lots and lots of ways you can get fit and strong in your own home.
Yeah. Fantastic. I suppose that the keeping it, as long as it's under the 30, the more you're doing, so I suppose the less weight, the less risk you're going to have, I suppose.
Yeah. So obviously with really, really heavy weights, if you're doing, let's take strength training, for example, rep ranges 1 to 5. To get to failure doing 1 to 5 reps, you need to be lifting substantial weight. And obviously there's more risk to that, risk of injury. So if you are doing higher rep range stuff and you're still getting to failure, you're safer in the higher rep ranges because the load that you're moving isn't quite as demanding, but the time under tension is still more or less the same, so you'll still get that. So it's safer, and you're getting more or less the same stimulus.
And now, a listener question for Heal Your Home.
So now is the time for answering a listener question. We've had so many questions in, but this really did stand out as being relevant to this content in regards to radon. So this is from Laura in Saltash. Hi, Laura. You have a 1905 home you've recently purchased and you're worried about radon as you've just recently moved to the area. How much more of risk am I in regards to this property than a new build? That's a really good question. So thank you so much, first of all, for listening. Now, this basically is all to do with how much work has been undertaken. Now, from the photos you've brought in, which has been very helpful, it looks like there hasn't been any renovation works undertaken to that property for a very long time. And therefore, hypothetically speaking, let's say no radon barriers have been put in place. Now, the issue with older properties, obviously radon is a gas and it can then emit through the floor. So you're going to have timber suspended floors, potentially solid concrete floors, all that do not have radon barriers, damp-proof courses, damp-proof membranes. So these will then naturally be coming up through the floors. Now, also, if you have a basement, this is somewhere that can accumulate and build up, and then it can cause further more harmful issues, especially if there's any cracks or stone walls, anything like that, that could potentially allow that gas to then, or that radon to travel up through your home. So unfortunately, when you're looking at the grand scheme of things, when comparing it to a modern build, yes, there will likely be more of a risk in the fact of radon buildup and exposure to radon within that home. But what I do suggest is go and get a radon measure kit, put that in your property. if you can, leave the property for the time that it is being measured by all means, but also make sure that wherever you are, you're in a well-ventilated environment. And hopefully then, once you get those results back, you can have a better understanding of the actual radon levels in that home. Hopefully they're not too high, but that's always something you can do. So please don't panic too much. There's a lot of things that can be done into that property, and it looks like you're going to be doing a lot of work yourself, so it can then be put into that for potentially the same budget as you're prepared to pay anyway. So I hope that has helped, but by all means, when you do find out, please let us know how you get on, because it would be great to know the journey that you go on. So thank you.
Jason's tenant top tip.
So the tenant top tip for this episode is: does your landlord have a legal obligation to have a radon test done, or can you as a tenant have the right to ask your landlord for a radon test? And the answer is absolutely. They have a duty of care under the Housing Act to actually do this and make sure that the home is safe for occupants, as in you, the tenant. So therefore, because there is such a direct link with so many potential deaths linked to radon every year, that this is a duty of care, and the landlord should be more than willing to have a radon test done. If for any reason they are not willing to, they are very cost efficient, and therefore potentially why not go and do the testing yourself? I'm not saying that you don't have the right to request it from a landlord, but in the meantime of going and toing and froing or going to citizens advice for additional advice, it may be worth you obtaining your own, just for peace of mind, to make sure you and your family remain safe.
Heal your home with Jason Ratcliffe, the home health expert.
Check out the website at homehealthexpert.co.uk for more information, to check out the services that we can help with for you and your family and improve your home's health, and also for the top tip guides that we have available for you. You can submit listener questions through our website and also by emailing our team at info@homehealthexpert.co.uk or by searching for Home Health Expert on Instagram and Facebook. We will try our absolute best to get round to your questions and help your family out to improve your home's health. Don't forget to subscribe to Heal Your Home wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube if you're watching along. Thanks again for listening, it really does mean a lot. We could not do this without you, and in actual fact it would be completely pointless. So please send in your questions, and I look forward to you joining me in the next episode of Heal Your Home. Your health, your future, it all starts here.